everyone, to another episode of Hail Yes. I'm Andrew Burkle, of course, joined by the Michigan beat writer here at the Free Press, Tony Garcia, and an extra guest today. We're super lucky to have on Dan Wolken from USA Today, longtime columnist, one of the voices of college football. So a really unique perspective to have on today. We're really lucky to have him. And Dan, you getting excited for the season here? I mean, less than a month to go, right?
Yeah, every weekend you kind of count the days, how many Saturdays without college football, and you savor them in one sense because you know that you're not going to have much of a life once the games start. But at the same time, that's what we all live for. That's what we do this for. So yeah, just it's a long off season. So we're finally at the end of it.
I think you're preaching to the choir with Tony, who is a one-man band on Michigan football and Michigan basketball, and the university that always is giving us storylines. So, Tony, how you feeling? You feeling ready for the season to start, or the little bit of dread kind of combo, or how you feeling?
Yeah, I've been watching Big Mouth a little bit on Netflix, and one of the latest seasons there is like an animated dread, like this big thing that sort of absorbs you and takes you into it. There's a little bit of that going on, but I think Dan said it very well. You savor the Saturdays that we got left in August, but we're all in this business because we love it. And one of the best times of year is coming up. So super excited about getting it all going.
So, Tony, let's just get right into the football. I think you got a question for Dan about where Michigan kind of stands here, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know one of the most common questions I get whenever anyone's reaching out or I see people in public is, how good is Michigan going to be? So I want you to sort of best case scenario, worst case scenario this for us. Let's start with the ceiling as you see it for Michigan football in 2025. Is that a Big Ten title? Is that return to the CFP? Is that a national championship? What's that look like?
Yeah, so I think the way I look at it is you break the Big Ten down into tiers. And I think that Penn State, Ohio State, at least as far as I'm concerned, are on their own tier. And then I think the question is whether the next tier is just Oregon or Oregon and Michigan. I think you could make an argument that Michigan and Oregon belong in the same group, or you could make an argument that Michigan belongs kind of in that next group with, Indiana, a few other teams probably. I mean, I think it really just comes down to whether or not you think Bryce Underwood is going to be ready to be a Big Ten level effective starting quarterback right away. And, I'm not at practice, so I don't know, you hear things, but it's hard to know whether to trust them, until you actually see some of these guys, especially guys that young, with the game speed, with the physicality of defenses that come at them, with the sophistication of game plans that teams have been putting in all summer. I don't know that there's any way to really answer it. Obviously, he's super talented. The trajectory of these young quarterbacks is often first month or 6 weeks. It's a little bit of a struggle, and then things kind of click in later in the season. But, what's interesting also about this is we're in an era where these guys at that level come in making a lot of money. And you can't discount that as a factor because some guys, I think, handle the pressure of that well, and some don't. And what happens if they start to hear the noise about how they're not living up to expectations? We saw this play out of Tennessee, right? With Nico Iamaleava. God, it's not even week one. I'm already butchering the name. Nico. Nico was paid a lot of money and, was good, but wasn't elite and wasn't playing to the level that maybe people expected based on the contract that he signed. And obviously he's gone. And I think everyone kind of looks at that as a disappointment. Again, I'm not saying that that's going to happen to Bryce. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, that's a factor that you have to consider in this era because it's real. And if you want to argue that money doesn't impact these guys, I don't think that's reality.
It's almost like I was listening to an NBA podcast earlier, and they were talking about how Mikal Bridges got traded for 5 first-round picks to the Knicks, and those price tags stick with them. It's like maybe Underwood is good, and maybe he has a really successful for freshman standard season, but it's almost impossible to ignore the price tag that comes along with them, or the trade that in the NBA or professional level. So I think there definitely is a certain element of that these freshmen have to deal with. But historically speaking, are there examples that come to mind of, talented groups surrounded by the right highly caliber freshman that comes in and kind of does it right away? Obviously, Manziel was a redshirt freshman, right? When he kind of took it off the ceiling off that one. But are there any examples that come to mind of teams sort of reaching the mountaintop or even, the playoff or with the true freshman quarterback? Because historically speaking, it is pretty common.
Yeah. I mean, I think typically what happens is that I sort of thinking back to the Deshaun Watson arc, for instance, at Clemson, right? I mean, he was clearly the guy that was going to be, the future of their program. He was the most hyped quarterback recruit in Clemson history, in the state of Georgia for many, many years. And, you could kind of see the trajectory and they were pretty conservative with him early on and they brought him in slowly. He didn't even start day one, but it was just very clear in some of the glimpses you did get that by the end of the season, he was, clearly going to be the guy. But no, I'm trying to think just off the top of my head, what quarterbacks have done that as freshmen. I mean, Caleb Williams as a freshman, did he start day one? I don't think he did, right? But he won the job like a few games into the season, right? So a lot of times you get that situation, but this is a little different because we're all expecting Bryce Underwood to be the day one starter, right?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. I mean, they're trying to keep things pretty hush hush around here in Ann Arbor. And I mean, Sherrone Moore, when we were in Las Vegas, he preempted our questions and said there is a quarterback competition and all the platitudes that is going to happen. And I wanted to ask you about that because I mean, you talk about and I guess the only freshman I can really think of day one and just doing it all the way to the national title is Trevor Lawrence in 2018. So he did do it. That's the only true freshman, I believe, that's won a national championship in his true freshman season as a starter. But outside of that, do you see Bryce as far as, let me rephrase that. They brought in Mikey Keene in order to sort of push him. Mikey was not available in this spring. How much do you think something like that just helps Bryce get the leg up when the fan base is already clamoring for him?
Yeah. I mean, I think coaches always look at it as you need a fail-safe. Obviously, most teams now want two quarterbacks who they feel like they can play because of injuries. It's the most delicate dance maybe in all of sports because of the transfer portal situation. But, I also think Keene knew what he was getting into, right? So you balance all that out. Again, without having the ability to be at practice and, seeing who's playing better, you have to think that you don't bring in Bryce Underwood with all of that hype, with all of the money and not play him right away unless he's just truly not ready. And I think, Michigan, especially with their defense, I think they've got some things that can protect him a little bit. I don't think Michigan is a team that you start a freshman quarterback, you need him to throw for 350 yards a game right off the bat. I think they know who they are as an offense. They have a distinctive, approach and style of play and identity. I don't think they're going to stray from that. And I do think that probably protects a young quarterback to some extent.
I see that happening. But all right. So we'll just wrap this section with, I am going to hold your feet to the fire with the ceiling, with a floor. I mean, what is the range that Michigan football fans are looking at?
Yeah. I mean, we could sit there and break down the entire schedule. I kind of think they're probably like an 8 or 9 win team. That's kind of what I have them. And obviously it's going to hinge on little factors, injuries, maybe injuries to other teams. You catch a team, that is missing players and you beat them when you otherwise wouldn't. All those things play into the mix. I don't think they're as good as Ohio State. Now, having said that, we've all seen this rivalry. We know that they get the game at home this year. The mental stress that game has caused Ohio State lately, that hasn't necessarily caused Michigan. That's a whole other deal. I would say Michigan is going to be on the fringe of the playoff discussion, but I would probably lean as of right now that they don't make it this year and they probably build toward thinking they're going to make it next year. That's sort of the way I would look at it.
You touched on the schedule a little bit, and schedule, especially in these mega conference era, is such a big factor in who is there at the end of the season now. Tony wrote today about some of the uniqueness of Michigan's schedule, where it's like they're playing a true road game against an SEC team for the first time, and they're playing 6 true road games, and no back-to-back home games, which is, around here everyone knows Michigan likes their 8 home games that they can have them. How do you make out of their schedule overall? Who do you think could trip them up outside of obviously Ohio State? Is Oklahoma someone Michigan fans should be worried about? Can you just kind of set the table for us on that?
Well, I will say with that Oklahoma thing, and obviously it's week 2, right? So it's very early in the season, and that is going to be a very big challenge for a freshman quarterback to go on the road and play down there. I would imagine a lot of Michigan fans at this point are probably thinking, okay, Oklahoma wasn't very good last year, so that's a game we should win. I mean, that's just the way fans typically think. There's a lot of buzz out there in the college football world that Oklahoma is going to be way, way improved this year, way better than people think. Whether that comes to pass or not, I don't know. It's obviously a huge year for them with Brent Venables, a little bit on the hot seat probably. They've made a lot of changes. They brought in Jim Nagy, who was running the Senior Bowl, to be their general manager. So if the word on the street is true, that's probably a game I'd pencil in Michigan for a loss, actually. Yeah, just very, very tough. Obviously, Nebraska on the road, I don't think that's an easy game at all. They should be way better. Ohio State, obviously, I'll be very interested to see what Michigan State looks like this year. I mean, to me, that team is a complete wild card, and that's another road game for them. USC not in the preseason top 25, which is kind of crazy when you just think about kind of the fanfare of Lincoln Riley going out to USC. They're totally under the radar. I would say there's probably a chance they're better than people are thinking coming into the season. So yeah, I mean, we've just mentioned 4 or 5 games there that, if Michigan wins 2 of them, I think they're probably on the road to a pretty good season.
Yep. No, you just picked out all the ones that we've sort of identified as we've gone through this exercise throughout the year. But we also wanted to get into a little bit of, Michigan, you can't talk Michigan football just on the field because it seems there's always something going on off the field. And just wanted to hear what you are hearing from the national perspective and just the way Michigan is viewed nationally these days. Of course, talking about the sign stealing scandal that has not yet been fully adjudicated. Michigan went before the NCAA Committee on Infractions in June and made their case for why the self-imposed 2-game suspension for Sherrone Moore should kind of be the end of it, as we've heard reports. And he confirmed the Big Ten commissioner, Tony Petitti, did write a letter to them asking that. I think maybe that's sort of just status quo for a conference commissioner, but I'll leave that to you. What do you make of everything that's happened around the Connor Stallion situation, how Michigan is perceived from their 2023 national title to their brand?
Well, I think when the scandal initially happened, the idea that most people who were not Michigan fans had about the fact pattern was that Connor Stallions was not doing this 100% on his own accord with nobody else knowing anything about it. I mean, if your job is to scout the opponents and you've got all this incredible information and you're stealing the signs or whatever, it would defy all logic for the coaches who are the recipient of that information to not have any curiosity about how it was achieved. Okay. And I do think that some of the evidence we've seen come out since then, and what I'm sure the Committee on Infractions is looking at and considering, is the culpability of Sherrone Moore, who in his position at that time would have obviously been in position to wonder, what was happening there. But having said all that, we're kind of in a post-scandal era, it seems like, in a lot of areas of the world and life, but especially college sports. It's like, I don't know what the appetite is anymore to just, put these huge suspensions and postseason bans and huge penalties on some of these teams are anymore. I can see it both ways. I mean, in some sense, it's old news, and you do have an NCAA that's been told not to punish people who had nothing to do with the situation, i.e. the current student athletes. At the same time, I do think that Michigan in that entire scandal kind of violated a principle of fair play. And I do think that was problematic for them. Now look, I'm not one of these people who was out there a couple years ago saying that it was a tainted national championship or anything like that. I mean, they were clearly the best team. They beat all the teams they needed to beat. The scandal came out. The scrutiny, the microscope was huge, and they still mowed down everybody at the end of the season. So I don't take anything away from their national championship, but integrity of the game, it's an interesting area, actually. I mean, I wrote a 10-part series, or I didn't write all 10 parts, but, and it was just coincidental that was happening while I was putting together this project about cheating in sports and why people cheat and different ways of cheating. I actually encourage people to go back and read it because it's just a fascinating topic to me, of why, of sort of where the line is between just, getting an edge, gray area and flat out cheating. I think there's evidence that Michigan went over the line, but I just don't see them getting this huge penalty. And I don't think at this point that would be appropriate. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think that's pretty spot on for what we're kind of gathering from, we're obviously this is kind of our, I don't want to say bread and butter, but over the last, Tony and I have been working together for basically 3 years now. And basically the entire time it's been, a topic of conversation. But you mentioned Sherrone and, he's kind of along for the ride on this. It's hard to say that he didn't have anything to do with it, but obviously the buck would stop with Harbaugh. I kind of want to ask you to zoom out on Sherrone a little bit and just say, like, what does everyone think about him as the football coach? Obviously, is he viewed as in strong standing nationally, would you say? And if they go 5-7 or 7-5 or somewhere in that range, is he in any risk of being on that bubble, or do you think he has a pretty long leash there?
I think he's got some leeway here. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to be Pollyannish about this. Like, Michigan fans are not going to ride the honeymoon forever. Like, they're going to want results. And especially when you invest the kind of money and resources that they have, you demand results. And we saw what Jim Harbaugh did. They won a national championship. Everyone was happy about that, but that doesn't sort of give you a pass forever. As with any young coach, we're still learning and he's still learning. We don't know everything about him. He's a pretty guarded guy in many ways. We've seen snippets of kind of the personality and what he's all about. But, I do feel like he's a little bit opaque, just in terms of who he actually is as a football coach. And, I think he's probably, if you were to be completely honest with all of us, I think he's in a little bit of a tough position because you want to draft off of what you did at the end of the Harbaugh era from a style of play standpoint, from, just everything that Jim was about, everything he imbued that program with. But that was also him. Like, that was his program. And you can't run a impersonation of Jim Harbaugh and be true to yourself and have that be authentic. You know what I mean? So what is the authentic Sherrone Moore personality and style and how he runs the program? I don't know, because at least from where I sit, it just seems like he's trying to still be the bridge. But at some point, especially if you aren't in the playoff, your first couple, 3 years, like, I don't know, there's a statute of limitations on how well that works. I don't know. How do you guys see it?
No, I think in Southeast Michigan football, we have definitely learned that you cannot try to be somebody else. I mean, the first thing I think is when Matt Patricia came in and tried to Bill Belichick the Lions, and it was just an abject disaster from day one. And I couldn't agree with you more, Dan. I totally got those vibes last year as he was sort of taking the reins. I mean, it felt like he was trying to be either Jim Harbaugh light or Jim Harbaugh 2.0 when really what he needs to do is find who Sherrone Moore is. And what we've seen in just a couple short years is he is an elite recruiter. He is a fantastic motivator. The fact that I don't think I will ever forget, as forgettable as the 2024 season was, I don't think I will ever forget that 3-0 finish. To come off a national championship, flounder to a 5-5 start, and still get the group to rally to score 50 on Northwestern, stun Ohio State. I mean, I haven't been around this as long as you have, but I've seen some games. And that was the most surprising result I've ever seen in person. And then to back it up and not just be like, oh, we beat Ohio State, like, let's just go roll into this bowl game, but to then beat Alabama when Mason Graham, when Kenneth Grant, when Will Johnson, Colston Love, when all your studs are sitting. I mean, it means that he can get the guys to buy in. And so that's what I see.
Now, my counter to that, and I agree with what you just said, my counter to that would be, okay, they did it at the end of the year when nobody had any more expectations for them. You know what I mean?
I'm certainly not excusing it, but here I go excusing it. The rationale, or sort of the way I see it, is, I mean, they brought in an entirely new defensive staff. They had a new offensive coordinator as well. I mean, every single defensive assistant was new. Sherrone was handed the job last minute. They were a little bit in limbo with what JJ was going to do. They completely botched the quarterback situation. And that was the fault of year one, Sherrone. But, and the OC was not up to snuff. They got him out of there after year one. So I think that beginning, and the schedule was a bit harder than people expected. I mean, Indiana was better than expected. Oregon was great. Texas was in the national semifinal, right? And and then you go on the road to Washington. It's always tough to travel west. And Illinois was the fifth loss. And so, I mean, at Michigan, saying Illinois and Indiana losses, that's just completely unacceptable. But I'm just saying you could sort of see how they kind of got to where they were a little bit.
Yeah. Those are good teams.
That's got to be the floor.
For sure. Like, again, and I go back to talking about the tiers. If we're looking back at the end of the year and Michigan is not in the Oregon tier, but is in the Indiana, Illinois tier, people are going to be pissed. But that's also a potential reality. Like, last year, nobody was going to judge Sherrone Moore for really anything that happened on the field. I'm not speaking for Michigan fans. I'm saying for me and people who do what I do. Like nobody was going to judge him for that. They win the last 3 games. They beat Ohio State, Alabama, the way they played in those games. All right, your eyebrows get raised, right? You're like, okay, this is interesting. Maybe there is something here. But, but at the same time, like the season was kind of already over for them in the sense that there were no more expectations at the end of the year. They kind of had a free roll. So now we get into a different stage of this. And I'm not predicting one way or the other because I don't really know. I don't have a great feel for Sherrone Moore as a head coach, like I said. And I'm just as interested as you guys and probably a lot of Michigan fans just to see how he matures. And I've done this a long time. I've seen a lot of young coaches. It's hard for them. It's very, very hard because, sometimes they are conservative, more conservative than they should be, just in everything, play calling, in, how they comport themselves and what they say to the media. Sometimes they're just a little too guarded and conservative because they're worried that they're being judged. I think it was interesting that honestly last year he was not judged in that way. So we'll see. We'll just see. Like they lose to Oklahoma. I think we'll find out a lot more about Sherrone Moore just in terms of how he handles that, because then probably for the first time he'll start to feel a little bit of that heat.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like when the new front office or the new coach drafts a rookie quarterback just to buy themselves some time. I think that Sherrone, no matter what, will have another year because of time, because of the freshman quarterback, right? Everyone's going to point to that, and rightfully so, because there's going to be some waves and he's kind of still getting his own people in there. But I think that you kind of did touch on one thing, and we'll wrap up here with Tony has a question before we finish. But the one thing you did touch on that I thought was interesting was like kind of the perception of Sherrone and how, and like the image he's giving off, because everyone remembers the Ohio State 2024 when he was, interim for Jim, right? The emotions are just pouring out and he is dropping swear words and you're like, oh, this guy's like, kind of MF-er, oh, I would get right in your face. And then like you watch him on Tony sees him every single week and he's just like, buttoned up beyond belief and not saying anything. And, I'll answer the question before we started. No quarterback. So it's almost like he is still kind of figuring out the image of himself, that not just he's who he is, but who he's giving off. And I think everyone feels that who's watching.
Hey, it's a different world when these guys slide over to the main chair. It just is.
Yeah, no. And I think the Penn State introduction to the tiers, to the MFer, to all that stuff, I think that painted this picture of him trying to make sure he's sort of shifting the narrative into, no, I am cool and calm, composed, collected. And I mean, one thing we didn't touch on, but just briefly, Oklahoma is his alma mater. And then he will be suspended at some point this season, either 3 and 4, which would be against Nebraska, or if the NCAA extends it to 4 games or moves it up to the Oklahoma. So all that's going to play a factor, right? And this is not the Jim Harbaugh suspension where you can install the game plan all week long. And then on Saturday, you're watching from the Barker Lounger. You are out of the facility. But Dan, you can comment on that if you want. And then I want to leave you with a final question I have. Maybe just a Big Ten hot take. It doesn't have to be that hot, but just a Big Ten, a bold opinion, if you will. What is your...
I got an easy one there. I don't think we're ever going to hear from Indiana again. Like,
wow. Love it.
And I was an Indiana defender last year, just in terms of, they didn't play the toughest schedule, but I'm sorry, you're not going to leave an 11-1 Big Ten team out of the playoff. Like, that's the reason you expanded to 12 teams, is to put a team like that in. So I was fine with it, and I thought they performed fine in their bowl game, or in the playoff game, but I just see that thing falling. I do.
Almost crumbling under the weight of the expectations type situation.
I don't know about weight of the expectations, but it's like, okay, everyone kind of knows the deal now. Last year, nobody saw him coming. Signetti was new to the league. He'd been, James Madison, obviously they did have a very good quarterback. Roark was very productive. I just think they caught people a little bit by surprise. And I'm not saying they weren't good. Like, they were good, but I've seen things like that before. We just didn't see them in the context of the playoff, of making the 12-team playoff, because it had never existed before. But we've seen teams kind of come out of nowhere like that, and first-year coaches kind of doing crazy stuff. And generally speaking, it fades away. And I just don't see Indiana, like, especially in this era, and there's, just so much more money, so many more Big Ten teams are going to spend money on football players. I just don't see them as a factor going forward. That's my hot take. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe my phone is going to ring and it's going to be Kurt Signetti cursing me out, but they can clip it and shove it in my face and freezing cold take me if I'm wrong. But I just don't see them being a factor.
No, we love it. Thanks for a good, strong take to finish us off here, man. And hopefully we stay in touch here, and maybe we'll have you on later in the season if Michigan is playing well, and we'll get some more perspective from you. But thanks for your time, man. We really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you as always to our bosses, Nicole Avery-Nichols, Bill Bradley, the sports editor, and Robin Chan. With that, we'll talk to you guys soon, and thanks for sticking with us this long.